Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. I'm Susan Munroe, Director of Economic Development at Chambers for Innovation in Clean Energy. We're excited to be here with you today, joined by our co-host, Southeastern Wind Coalition. And we both welcome you to today's webinar, where we'll begin to take a deeper dive into the economic benefits of offshore wind development in North Carolina. First, following all of our speakers, we look forward to a robust question and answer session facilitated by Katharine Kollins, Executive Director of the Southeastern Wind Coalition. Please feel free to submit your questions during the Q&A session box, and that Q&A box is located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So let's get started on that deeper dive. Many of you here today are working every day to rebuild our state's economy, to rebuild your local economy, to be stronger and certainly more resilient. Offshore wind is one of those unique opportunities at this moment in time and moving forward to diversify our potential for economic growth and certainly job creation, not only in North Carolina, but for the entire US economy. The pipeline of offshore wind projects is estimated to deliver approximately $100 billion in economic investment, more than 80,000 jobs, and provide enough electricity to power millions of homes. And that's what brings us here today, the potential for North Carolina, specifically Kitty Hawk Offshore Wind, 27 miles off the coast of the Outer Banks in Dare County, developed by Evangrid Renewables. Keeping in mind, there is also offshore wind development opportunities off the coast of Wilmington. With more than 2,000 megawatts of clean energy added to the grid, the Kitty Hawk project will bring high-paying jobs, considerable economic investment, and a demand for a deep regional supply chain. It's also important to mention that the state will certainly benefit from offshore wind development in Virginia as well. But as for Kitty Hawk Wind, there are already local companies and people at work right now contributing new tax revenues, and there are opportunities to attract additional infrastructure investment. So let's discuss the economic benefits ahead. To get us started, I am pleased to introduce Andy Guissenbuehler with BVG Associates. Andy brings over 25 years of extensive project experience and has held multiple positions, such as with companies like ABB, Alstom, and GE. He led Alstom's wind business in North America for 7 years, including delivery and installation of Block Island, while heading up GE's US offshore wind operations. Further, he has served as chairman for several wind energy operators. Andy's consulting experience includes advising US East Coast states on supply chain, port infrastructure, and wind energy strategic planning, including progressing an innovative Jones Act marine logistics solution. Andy's going to tee up the offshore wind opportunity in the US and how we will gather data to better understand the potential for North Carolina. Following Andy, we have Amy Braswell, Executive Vice President of the Ahoskie Chamber of Commerce in Hertford County, who will introduce the plant manager for a key state employer, Nucor Steel, who looks forward to the supply chain opportunities for offshore wind. Andy, thank you for being here with us today, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Susan. Appreciate that. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy to share my excitement about offshore wind. And, you know, excitement has been shared for many years, but finally we have actually numbers to back it up. And the numbers are extremely impressive. And that's when you look on the next page, please, we kind of see how things have evolved over time. For many years, we were wondering, where's the volume? How can we reach economies of scale? How can we get this industry off the ground? That question has been answered probably more than anyone expected. As you see in the top left, you know, it also is based on the leadership of the states to launch their offshore wind targets, which are right now in a neighborhood of 28 gigawatts. And we anticipate that will grow to exceed 35 gigawatts by 2035. And that's the East Coast alone. But we not only have strategies and long-term targets, we actually have already 6.5 gigawatts of signed offtake agreements. And actually on the map on the right, you see, some of these projects listed just to give you an overview. And the Kitty Hawk is one of them, the Evangrid Renewables project, which was mentioned before, which is going to be a 2.4 gigawatt wind farm. So in addition to the 6.5 gigawatts, we have nearly 5 gigawatts of new solicitations in the pipeline. That's mainly New York, New Jersey, but also there is activities in Maryland and other states. So all that, of course, now gets added. We add also the Virginia project, which is not a classic PPA; it's a ratepayer-based agreement, but that's another 2.6 gigawatts. So we're talking, close to 10 gigawatts of real projects. And when you have a supply chain perspective, you not only need to understand the long-term perspective, but also the actual operational projects, which will be out there in the market to purchase equipment and services. On the next page, we can have a look at that base. What is exactly, where are these $100 billion coming from? And that is really based on the anticipated volume up to 2035. And I just need to put you at ease. When you look at this graph, it's a very helpful graph because it shows you where the volume is in which years. And I think we are well aware that there's some shifts. Some of those projects may shift a year or so. But these graphs kind of also indicate as if the market would drop off. And that's definitely not the case. We believe with the whole initiatives of clean energy to be the future, to dominate energy consumption and also provide energy independence, that will continue to grow. But that chart is, of course, built on known policies and projects. So I'm very confident that, goes out nearly 15 years, that more will be added at the back end. On the next page, just to add one more perspective. So we say, okay, along the East Coast, we have, up to $100 billion worth of capital expenditures. On that pie chart, you see how the cost base is split up. So this really reflects the lifetime cost of a wind farm. And on the left side, you see that, operation and maintenance repair is a substantial portion, about 40%. The green section reflects the balance of plant. These are all, the cables, cable supply, foundations. And then the blue section in the bottom, which is also a significant piece of the pie, that's the installation. So that gives you an avenue to kind of anticipate what kind of services are out there. So this is one perspective. And I think the other perspective is which market is actually accessible for North Carolina. And if we again start, with a 30 gigawatts along the East Coast, I think we can say for component manufacturing, and I think for North Carolina being actually a very strong player in component manufacturing in general, the whole 30 gigawatts is an accessible market. You can, you can ship major components all across the East Coast. So that's for components, it's 30 gigawatts. Then if you look at the actual implementation, project execution, staging, installation, logistics, there I would say it's probably in the neighborhood of 10 gigawatts. If we assume that, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina is kind of an economic cluster or a regional focus. So that's probably would be the scale there. And then on those activities, which are very locally driven, which is primarily operation and maintenance, repairs, which is also an activity with a, a 25-year horizon. That is probably, depending how strong offshore wind will develop in the region, but that's going to be approaching 5 gigawatts easy. So I think there's definitely a lot of potential. Now the question is, what do we do to focus on the right opportunities, and that we really collaborate all the key players together? And on the next page, you see the basis for this North Carolina offshore wind supply chain and infrastructure assessment. And I think John Hartin has, in the last two webinars, given you an outline about what's the focus and what's the priority. And I think most importantly, we have the reinforcement that offshore wind energy development on the production side, but also on the supply chain side, is a key priority for North Carolina, which it forms the basis. And on the next bullet point, you see that this triggers a tremendous opportunity for economic, local economic and also environmental benefit. And also, of course, to not just on the supply chain side, but also to change the energy mix and add a substantial amount of clean energy locally accessible and locally controllable, which I think is very beneficial. So these are some of the thoughts also in terms of how do we align the various parties and how do we get a clear overview, who can do what, who should speak to each other, because it's a new industry, and that new industry should primarily also focus on synergetic activities. We have, in the US, the offshore wind industry is a new industry. However, we have a lot of synergies with oil and gas, where the US is a very strong player, but also there are a lot of synergies with existing businesses and manufacturing in North Carolina, because it's major heavy equipment, and also a lot of high technology items are part of that. So on this infrastructure assessment on the next page, the supply chain and infrastructure assessment, I'm very pleased to share the team working on that. And you see it's a group of multiple organizations, all of them well experienced in the field. It's BVG Associates, Lloyd's Register, and Timmins Group, who have actually collaborated before on East Coast projects and assessments. And I cannot, point out enough the importance to have NC State on board. That really has given us a whole new perspective and added tremendous momentum to our presence. And one of the key success factors is really that we form an integrated team and collaborate closely with the NC Department of Commerce, the Governor's Office, the NC Department of Environmental Quality, and of course the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina. And we'll get a separate session with Chris on that point. So that's really the key point, to operate as an integrated team and to develop the strategy, and back it up with findings and conclusions. And that leads to the next page, which I will not go through in detail, but I just would like to share how pleased we are that there's so much energy in North Carolina and so much interest for offshore wind. So all these organizations you see in that box have reached out to us and are already talking to the team and committed to collaborate. Several of them have issued letters of support. So I think that is an early indicator of an excellent collaboration. And on the last page, I just would like to briefly share the key steps of this supply chain and infrastructure assessment. On the left side, the alignment on strategy and deliverables, that's absolutely key to be clear what the objectives are. and then building the partnership analysis and tools that is really to identify what is needed, what is there, how do we document that and make it accessible to all the stakeholders. And then the opportunity analysis and the gap analysis will then deliver a view, where do we have the strategic fits and where do we probably have areas where we say that's not an area to focus on, so that we develop the maximum momentum and also have a long-term strategy, because some of these activities require significant investments and long-term assets. So we want to make sure these are strategically evaluated and chosen. And that then actually culminates in point 4, where we summarize the strength and the opportunities and the hurdles and how much it takes to pursue a certain activity and which other activities may be best to move to the side, that we stay focused. And then the final report, I always think long reports, many people don't like them and don't read them. So I think in that report, the key will be a very fundamental list of, let's say, 3 to 5 recommendations, how to go forward in a coordinated and energetic way. So that was my summary. Thank you very much. I'm handing back to Susan to take this further. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That was great to hear about the path that we need to embark on to really make sure that North Carolina is one of those strong players in offshore wind. So thank you for that review. And I think that our next speaker, Amy Braswell, was probably excited to hear about those tens of millions of dollars in opportunity for Eastern North Carolina. So next up is Amy Braswell, Executive Vice President of the Ahoskie Chamber.
Good afternoon, everybody. I am the director of the Ahoskie Chamber of Commerce, and we're in Hertford County, North Carolina. We are eagerly anticipating the development and the operation of the wind field off of Kitty Hawk, as well as the one off of Virginia, because we are well located to service both of them. I'm a sailor, and I know firsthand that it takes a blend of energy sources to meet all the needs and occasions on my boat. So why would we as a community and a state not want the same? When my colleagues across the state think of Northeastern North Carolina, they think primarily of agriculture, and we do have some very successful farming operations here, both crop and tree farm. But we've also developed over the last 40 years in Hertford County an industrial base, which has provided economic stability to our communities, and then we draw a workforce up from the 60-mile radius. Hertford County is well situated to participate in the supply chain and the workforce development that goes along with these wind projects. We are 40 miles from Suffolk, Virginia in the greater Hampton Roads area and 60 miles from the Virginia Beach waterfront. We're 40 miles east of the I-95 corridor. We're 23 miles west of the future I-87 corridor that's going to connect Norfolk area to Raleigh, and 50 miles from the CSX intermodal project in Edgecombe County. We have a very competitive infrastructure already in place here in Hertford County. We've put in heavy rail lines, we have natural gas, we've got the Chowan River. And the Chowan River already has barge activity, barge ports, and it averages a 26-foot depth on the channel right now. The river runs into the Albemarle Sound and connects both to the port of Morehead City and to the port of Virginia via the ICW. We've got reliable high-speed internet access in our industrial areas here, and we've also got Roanoke Electric adding to the broadband project, and we're very lucky to have them do it. Countywide water is already in place, and we have a water treatment facility in Ahoskie that's considered state-of-the-art. We operate it right now at about 45% capacity, and it was built for the future. So we are able to anticipate the future loads and handle them. Cost of land and property in Hertford County is very, very reasonable compared to our urban neighbors. And it has invited about on a weekly basis me sending out reload packages both to individuals and to businesses looking to come here because they can have the access to the greater metropolitan area of Tidewater and the Hampton roads without paying the prices of being up there and the traffic. There are a lot of benefits. We've also got open land that are to be developed and we're working on around these infrastructures. We've got Roanoke Chowan Community College and Chowan University that would be potential sites for workforce development and training. We have an extensive healthcare delivery system here, and healthcare delivery is going to be important for industries coming in. Everybody has to make sure that their employees and their families have good access to great healthcare. We've got the Vidant Hospital system, we've got a behavioral health system, we've got the East Carolina School of Dental Medicine, and we've got a Roanoke Chowan Community Health Center that it was one of the first public-private health centers in the country, and they've been fantastically successful. They include an on-site pharmacy with $4 medicines. It's pretty amazing. Hertford County has developed and is investing in a new private aviation facility. When Purdue came here back in the 70s, they needed an airport and we built one. We have already put in new fuel tanks and it's self-serve for pilots. We are now have raised the old terminal, building the new one. We've invested completely in it. And we are putting new fuel services in place, and we're going to have runway construction and hangars next on the list. The most wonderful thing we got is Nucor Steel. In terms of supply chain, Hertford County being home to Nucor and many of their supply chain companies is perfectly positioned for these projects. And Nucor to supply structural materials for development through ongoing operations of these wind fields. So today I want to introduce you all to Chad Beard. Chad is our new Vice President and General Manager at Nucor Steel, Hertford County. He follows Bob McCracken. Some of you all probably remember Bob, and he retired, I think, at the 1st of June. And he's pretty happy in retirement. We're really happy to have Chad. He's the new Vice President and General Manager, and he has 13 years of experience with Nucor, and he served multiple roles and in multiple business units with them, including the sheet business, joist and deck, and the plate businesses. Chad's got his bachelor's degree in accounting from Ohio Northern University, and he and his wife Libby are originally from Ohio. They've got 4 daughters, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to present to you now Chad Beard.
All right. Thank you, Amy. I appreciate the introduction. And to everybody on the webinar, I appreciate the opportunity to sit in and give a little background on Nucor and more specifically our operation here at Hertford County and things and investments that we already have in the pipeline that I think would be a great match for this entire initiative. So we can go to the next slide. So first I want to do was just give everybody, if you don't already know, just a quick snapshot of Nucor as a whole. And the real thing to take away from here is the breadth of the supply chain that we have at Nucor. You can see on this map are over 300 facilities in North America made up of over 26,000 teammates. So obviously you can see some of the information over there. We are the largest steel producer in the United States, over 27 million tons a year. We're also the largest recycler. We recycle over 22 million tons of scrap metal annually. And we are a Fortune 150 company in the Fortune 500. And you can see some of our performance information from 2019. But really, you know, I really want to highlight here the vertical integration that we have and just the supply chain capabilities. Everything from our steel mills to steel products to raw materials, joint ventures, and we have a lot of construction on the way also, and I'll share a little bit about that here in the future. Next slide, please. So this is a little more specific, right, to North Carolina. So our corporate office is in Charlotte, North Carolina, and we are the 3rd largest company based in the state. So that's really awesome. We have about 1,000 jobs in the state of North Carolina, And as a Nucor teammate, the average median pay is just over $100,000. So our teammates work hard, and we pay them very well for what they do. Some of the information over there is a little redundant, but I would like to share. With that 1,000 jobs, we also estimate that indirectly we create about an additional 4,000 to 5,000 jobs in the state each year. So quite a decent number. And then Nucor does generate more than $50 million annually in taxes for the state of North Carolina. That's all counties, cities, and school districts combined. So obviously we have a big presence in North Carolina, and you can see some of our other facilities here, some of our Harris Rebar and DJJ facilities on the map. That's kind of a overview of Nucor and then specific to North Carolina. Next slide, please. So this is us at Hertford County. This is our mill. We're located here in Cofield. The plant started up in 2000. It was a greenfield operation. We sit on a 990-acre site here in Cofield, and from a capacity standpoint, we have the approximate ability to ship almost 1.5 million tons of plate a year. You can see that we have a lot of certifications, ISO quality through the CE mark, Lloyd's. You can see all those. And also we're obviously in 14001 environmental approved as well. And we are not strangers to the wind market. We have sold historically since 2005 over 1 million tons we've sold into the wind tower market. And then we were something we're very proud of, and I hope everybody on here is too. We were the first U.S. domestic mill to be CE mark approved. And we also have some current UT practice that includes the A578 and A435 steel grades as you get into that. So that's kind of a quick overview of Hertford County and our operation and where we sit here in Cofield. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is a lot of technical stuff here, but basically what I want to show here is our current capabilities within the wind tower market products that we can provide. And you can see the S355 grade and the widths, lengths, and thicknesses that we currently are capable of supplying right here out of Hertford County. And then there at the bottom, this really highlights our future capabilities. We are building a sister division in our plate group. It is not in North Carolina, it's in the state of Kentucky, but it is a state-of-the-art, brand new steel plate facility that will be able to, when you take that combined with what we do at Hertford County, we will be able to, from a supply chain standpoint, supply most, any, and all needs from a steel plate standpoint for the wind tower market. So we're excited about that that addition to the plate group coming up. Next slide, if you could. And this is just a little quick background on that that facility being built in Brandenburg, Kentucky. So you can see that will allow us as a group to go up to 14 inches thick, 168 inches wide. And we even redesigned part of that facility to be able to supply the wind market. And it's a very large investment, over $1 billion investment that Nucor's spending. And we made sure we catered it towards being able to supply this market. And you can see some of the other capabilities there. And the anticipated startup is the fall of 2022. So that's a little bit of background about Hertford County and then what's coming down the pipeline with our sister division. Next slide, please. All right, some final thoughts. I'll say that Nucor always has and continues to view the offshore wind market as an emerging market, and it is a key strategic focus for a short-term and long-term. I think that there's a significant impact for the domestic manufacturing industry and local economies. I think we all recognize that. More specifically here, if I could give some, concrete reasons that I feel strongly about that, and we at Nucor feel strongly about that. One is, and specifically here in North Carolina, is the long-term stability that a project like this being supplied out of here could bring to North Carolina and additional jobs. You know, from looking at it just from Nucor Steel Hertford standpoint, you know, as many markets that we can supply product into, that helps with the cycles of the steel industry in our business. We like to be diversified. So the more we can be diversified, it keeps our teammates working, and it allows us to add additional jobs to meet that tonnage and those capacities. So absolutely, there's a huge impact this would have on our specific facility here and local economy. And then after that, which is probably just as important, if not bigger, is the ability to attract the downstream manufacturers. Like, you know, Amy talked about the area a little bit, and just all those downstream jobs and processes that would come out of a project like this, and that fully integrated supply chain. I think there's a lot of potential there, and we would love to be a part of that. And as I said earlier, you know, we made modifications to our new steel mill that we're building, state-of-the-art mill that to support the offshore wind industry, so heavier and wider sections. So for all those reasons, I see this as being a very significant impact to local manufacturing and industry for us. And then the last thing I would say, you know, whenever you get to project time, right, I would just say that Nucor, you know, we pride ourselves on selling projects, not just products. So, you know, that supply chain that I've talked about is critical in a project like this. And we do this all over the country and a lot of different projects. And we will do everything we can to make your specific project successful and play our part in doing that. And I think in having our local resources here will play a big part in that. So that is everything that I had on my for my time today. Again, appreciate being here, and I'll turn it back over to Susan. Thank you.
Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Amy. So as you can see, I think there's some good things ahead for North Carolina, especially as we continue to rebuild our economy and to make it stronger and even more resilient. So to bring this all together for us from an economic point of view, we welcome next Christopher Chung. In 2015, Chris joined the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina as Chief Executive Officer, bringing more than 23 years of state-level economic development experience to the role. As a private-public partnership, EDPNC is responsible for a number of economic development functions, including new business recruitment, existing business support, international trade and export assistance, small business startup, tourism, sports, and film promotion, which you will hear later about. When offshore wind has the potential to bring many of those business organizations to our state and to increase economic investment. So since 2015, EDPNC has helped North Carolina win nearly 750 recruitment and expansion projects, resulting in 99,000 announced new jobs and $22 billion in announced new investments across the state. Chris, thank you for being with us today.
Great. Thank you so much, Susan. Nice to see you again. Some of you who are attending the webinar, the last time I saw Susan, it was back on March 12th. A few of us were gathered for the Outer Banks Chamber of Commerce Annual Economic Summit to talk about the opportunities in offshore wind. Of course, that was just as our world here in North Carolina and the United States was really starting to change. So it's nice to know that even though the world has changed tremendously in the past 6 months, the commitment and the momentum for North Carolina's pursuit of offshore wind remains really, really steady, thanks to some of the things that you've heard about, as well as some of the things I'll touch on briefly. As you heard Susan say, a lot of what I say will hopefully just tie everything together that you've heard from the previous presenters. We're very excited here at the EDPNC for the role that we hope to be able to play as offshore wind becomes a more important part of the state's economy. I'm going to touch briefly on some of the ways that I feel like we'll be able to contribute to the economic potential that this very fast-growing industry has for our state. So next slide, please. Really quickly, as you heard from Susan's introduction, we're an organization that's tasked with doing economic development on behalf of the state. We're a contractor to the North Carolina Department of Commerce, so we work with them on our mission, which involves attracting new industry, supporting growth needs of existing firms, and even things like international trade and tourism promotion. Next slide, please. Really, when you look at the opportunities that we are most excited about when it comes to offshore wind, you heard both of the presenters speak previously about that potential to attract companies. We know that, of course, as more of these offshore wind farms get developed, just the physical componentry that's going to need to enable these farms to operate successfully, a lot of that, of course, has to be made somewhere. And our hope is that many of those products and components that go into those offshore winds, as we are fond of saying, we would like our unfair share of that to happen here in North Carolina. Now, where those companies choose to go, that's subject to a lot of different criteria that's going to be important to them. But our job here in North Carolina is to make the case as aggressively as we can that as these manufacturers are thinking about supplying their products to offshore wind installations up and down the east coast of the US, as they think about where to locate their manufacturing capacity to supply those farms, we want to be able to get in front of those companies to make the case for why North Carolina is the optimal location for them to manufacture, be it from a workforce standpoint, be it from an energy cost standpoint, be it from the type of real estate options that we may be able to present, and of course, even issues like taxes and economic development incentives. Those are all part of a comprehensive decision-making process that companies that we work with all the time need to make. And of course, offshore wind, we hope, is just the newest example of the types of companies that will be in regular dialogue with about North Carolina as a potential location. At the same time, although it is important and certainly going to get a lot of attention if we have success in attracting new companies to locate here, you just heard from Chad, for example, from Nucor, talking about the tremendous potential for existing employers here in North Carolina, especially, again, in our manufacturing space, but also extending into some of the service providers that offshore wind farms will depend on. If we can help some of our existing employers and manufacturers in North Carolina to perhaps to pivot to, or at least diversify into, producing products and components or services for the offshore wind farm industry, that itself also has potential for economic development in the form of job creation, in the form of investment that these companies will have to make to complete that pivot or to diversify into offshore wind. Companies like Nucor, as you heard, they're very large. They're the third largest company here in North Carolina. They're not going to need the assistance of an organization like ours, but there's going to be a lot of smaller and medium-sized firms in North Carolina that may have legitimate potential to pivot into this fast-growing sector. And if we can help some of those companies to make that pivot, that helps them diversify their revenue streams. It helps them to grow a potential new business line. That itself, like I said, has great economic development opportunity behind it as well. Workforce development and reskilling, upskilling. We're very fortunate in North Carolina that one of the ways that we often differentiate ourselves when we're pitching the state for companies that are looking to locate or expand here is we like to lead not just with our universities, but also with our 58 community colleges all over North Carolina. Our community college system is really at the front edge of helping make sure that our employers, especially in manufacturing and industry, have the type of talent and skill set that they need with their workers. Those 58 community colleges partner with countless hundreds, maybe thousands of businesses every year to perform customized training, on-demand training for workers who go to these manufacturers' workplaces every day. Those community colleges will play a tremendous role in helping our workforce here in North Carolina develop whatever skill sets and knowledge that they need to produce products and components for the offshore wind industry. They may even help, they certainly will be helping, I think, to train workers who are involved in any sort of service professions that, again, are also catering to the offshore wind industry, be that maintenance, be that repair. So those community colleges are going to be a great ally on the upskilling and reskilling of our workforce. And keep in mind where we are right now, economically speaking, these past 6 months have, unfortunately, North Carolina is no exception to how much economic hurt has been inflicted on certain sectors of our economy. You look at North Carolina, and tourism has historically been a huge part of our state economy. 26, 27 billion a year in economic impact, hundreds of thousands of individuals who work in tourism and hospitality. Unfortunately, these past 6 months have caused a lot of hard times for small businesses that make up the tourism and hospitality businesses. And many of these firms have unfortunately had to downsize or have, in worst case scenarios, had to close altogether, putting out of work a lot of people, probably easily thousands, if not tens of thousands at this point. Some of those businesses will bounce back as we get COVID-19 behind us as a globe. Some of those businesses may not, and therefore some of those individuals will need to seek new employment. And is there an opportunity for some of those displaced individuals to acquire the skill sets to transition into a career in an industry that supports offshore wind, especially in the eastern part of our state where tourism is a big sector, but where we also know there's going to be great economic impact from offshore wind. So upskilling, retraining, reskilling some of those individuals, that's certainly something that presents a great opportunity from an economic development standpoint. And then, of course, as offshore wind becomes a more prevalent form of energy generation in the United States, including for our utility partners here in North Carolina, we know that that's also going to have some secondary economic benefits in the sense that many of the companies that we talk to about expanding or locating in North Carolina, they're not just interested in how much energy costs and how available and reliable it is. Obviously, those are very important things. We know increasingly more and more companies are interested in how sustainably sourced that energy is as well. And so we know that if an increasing share of our energy portfolio in North Carolina is sourced through renewable sources like offshore wind, we know that that's going to help us in the eyes of those companies that are prioritizing clean, sustainable, or renewable sources of energy that they'll be consuming, whatever sector or product that it is that they're making. So if we can kind of jump ahead to the next slides, I think these slides that I had were really just illustrating the opportunities. Sorry, go back one, please. This is just a quick diagram showing some of these many components that go into a traditional offshore wind. You see, for example, GE marketing their offshore wind turbine. But even within these turbines, beyond the big components of blades and nacelles and towers, there are hundreds of components that go into making these things work efficiently and effectively. Some of that supply chain, and we're going to find this out with the supply chain study that Andy and his team are doing for North Carolina. We're going to see which of these companies, which of these product categories have the best potential for us to attract right here to North Carolina. And so, of course, like I said, our job is try to get our unfair share of that manufacturing activity happening here in North Carolina. Next slide. Again, this is something, I was trying to find something a little more recent. This is from the American Wind Energy Association, but this just shows wind power related manufacturing and supply chain facilities currently in the United States. Of course, I think all of us as economic developers hope that 10 years after today, or once offshore wind gets going, we're going to see even more of these red dots all across the United States. Hopefully they skew towards the eastern part of the country, and hopefully in our case, they skew more towards the North Carolina part of the East Coast. But either way, that's a good encapsulation of the potential opportunity that we're hopeful for. Next slide, please. Again, I took this photo in touring the first offshore wind farm here in the United States, first commercial scale up in Rhode Island off of Block Island. But if you look at the picture in the foreground, this is a crew, I think it's a crew vessel terminal, basically to enable crew to support and maintain offshore wind turbines. Even products like this present an economic development opportunity. U.S. workboats in Hubert just inked a contract in late 2019 to supply a couple of these crew vessel terminals, again, in anticipation of more and more of these types of products being needed to service America's offshore wind industry. So economic development even looks like that. It's not just the category of products that go into the wind turbines. It's this type of product as well. Let me go to the last slide here. We can skip on this one here real quick. Real quickly, what are our challenges? As we're out there marketing ourselves for offshore wind, we want to say, of course, that North Carolina is very interested in getting these companies. At the same time, we know that our policy environment has to be supportive of offshore wind. We can't be out there telling offshore wind supply chain companies, we want you here, this is an important industry for us to get in North Carolina, and somehow if legislation or policy doesn't reflect that same interest or embrace of the industry, we're probably going to get called out on that pretty quickly in terms of that sales pitch. So there's got to be that alignment. It's a little bit of a chicken and an egg situation. Policymakers in any state may be reluctant to do too much for offshore wind if they don't see the economic benefits first. And of course, those economic benefits may not come until you set the table from a policy standpoint. So that is something I think for those who track policy to be mindful of. Market projections versus market reality. I was in Missouri doing economic development back about 11 years ago when onshore wind was really becoming big. And we certainly saw a good number of companies setting up supply chain manufacturing. Is it ever going to be as many as people believe at the outset of the trend? You know, obviously it will depend. We hope it is, but we also have to be prepared that if the potential doesn't match up with what that reality is, we're of course going to have to answer for that. And then, of course, like I said, there's only going to be so many of these companies coming over and setting up operations in the U.S. There's a lot of states, Virginia, South Carolina, Maryland, Rhode Island, who are no doubt going to be wanting their unfair share. We've got to be mindful of that as we go out there and aggressively promote North Carolina as the home for manufacturing to support this industry. So really look forward to the questions that we get and appreciate being part of the team effort tasked with growing this important industry for North Carolina.
Thanks, Chris. This is Katharine Kollins, and I'm president of the Southeastern Wind Coalition, and very excited to be with you all today and really appreciate our fantastic speakers today. I thought you all did a great job, and I loved how everything tied together. So we are going to be taking questions through the Q&A chat box. So please feel free to enter your questions there. And then I will relay those to our panelists and hopefully get a chance to answer all the questions that you folks out there have. So our first question from David Goss is, how can representatives of Northeast North Carolina counties that are strategically located adjacent to the Dominion and Kitty Hawk wind farms become part of the offshore wind assessment and supply chain process? So Andy, I'm going to direct that question to you.
I'll be glad to address that because it's probably the most fundamental and most important question of all, because there's obviously a huge market. There's obviously tremendous capabilities, but the challenge is to make sure you're talking to the right person at the right time with the right product. And that's really the challenge. So I would say there are probably four ways to address this. One I would call is transparency. You know, that I think there needs to be a clear structure about what are the products which are required, what are the services required, how is the match between the established industry and the needs of the new offshore wind industry? Because I think even though it looks like a very difficult task, on the other hand, offshore wind is a new industry. So basically not a single business on the East Coast is ready for that. So everyone has to go through this process. And I think it's challenging, but it's also very doable because the pressure will be on both sides. It's not going to be only the supplier trying to find a way to enter this market. The developer, the tier one suppliers, they're equally under pressure because they need to, first of all, have a competitive, high quality product. They need also to look at local economic benefits, and they have a supply chain challenge to solve. So I think both sides have a high interest and initially probably a high stress level to figure that out. So you know, as part of this, you know, we always call it electronic toolkit, you know, whatever that will be. There will be tools out there to identify the key specifications, the key requirements, and also that we try to channel which services are most focused. The second item is timing, very critical. When you go to a company and say, I offer this product, either they're in urgent need and then you're just at the right time, or this is a problem they deal with a year later, and then it's not going to be successful. So I think understanding the flow of the business, and also I think raising that knowledge, and then the access to those potential business partners. I'm pretty sure that Dominion, Evangrid, tier 1 suppliers, Nucor, all these major players will probably have supplier platforms. Maybe there are going to be some supply chain events. So there will be vehicles to facilitate that access. And then I think the fourth element, which is quite demanding, is really the planning aspect, because you have planning in terms of infrastructure, which of course is also long-term investment, but also planning in terms of workforce. Very important to kind of channel in the right direction. So it's a very big challenge, and it should be the focus of pretty much everything we do in the next years, is to make sure those parties find each other and operate as a successful team.
Thanks, Andy. And also, I think that the question might also be referring to specifically with the supply chain and ports assessment that BVG and that team is going to be conducting. If either I am, let's say, a relatively large manufacturer or a smaller manufacturer, or I am an economic development professional in North Carolina, how can those folks make sure that the assets that they might know about that are specific to a county, or not out there in a big marketing way, how can they be in touch with the supply chain assessment and kind of let you all know that they exist?
I think we'll note this as a key point. That's something we have to develop, how we would best do that. I think I shared this overview with all those organizations reaching out. So there probably will be stakeholder activities, and as I mentioned, also online tools. And I think this is an area we need to address also in the recommendation. So we definitely welcome people reaching out. It should be a two-way street to collaborate on that.
Thanks, Andy. And I'll just say for those of you listening today with that same question, one immediate, easy way to kind of get your company and name out there, the Southeastern Wind Coalition does have an interactive supply chain map. And you are welcome to go on our website, and it's very easy to navigate to the supply chain, and you can add your companies there. And certainly that information being all accessed in one place will be available for the BVG team to include. Andy, one other question related to that, and that's just how specific will the BVG report be? Will you guys be producing a list of companies or other resources in the state that have the capacity to support the offshore wind industry, or will it be more of a general overview and how the state can engage in supply chain?
I think it probably will be a combination, but I think the decision if a certain business is now a good fit for the industry, I think that's a decision which, of course, the customer ultimately will make, whoever buys the service or the product, being a developer or a tier 1 supplier, or the company itself. So I think this is also a company decision because everyone will have to migrate into this new market. So it's a strategic decision to say, okay, we would like to expand and migrate into that territory, or no, we position us differently. So I think the objective also of North Carolina Chamber of Commerce is to provide a platform which allows people to go through that process, and companies go through that process themselves, so that everyone is always in control. So we would not kind of declare, okay, this company is perfect and that company is not a good fit. That wouldn't be the role. I think that's ultimately everyone can make the decision which business to pursue.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Andy. And then, Chad, a question for you. Can you address the rail, barge, and highway infrastructure needed to support the offshore industry from the Hertford facility, and any potential synergies between Nucor and the Virginia and North Carolina ports?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And I would say, you know, the good news is currently we have a lot of synergies with those folks. We currently bring in, we barge from the Morehead City right now some of our raw materials that we use. So we already have a relationship with them, and it comes right up here to our facility on the Chowan River. So we also have direct rail access to Morehead City, but also the Port of Norfolk. So we have all those synergies and capabilities. Absolutely, we can utilize for a program like this. And as far as highway infrastructure, you know, I would say that, you know, we're less than an hour from the I-95, you know, corridor. So yes, a lot of that is already in place for us to just utilize and expand on. Did that answer the question? Was that?
Yeah, I think so, Chad. So I actually have a quick second part.
Yeah.
Question for that, and that's just, you know, you mentioned the newer facility in Kentucky being prepared to support the you know, and some special considerations that have been included in the development of that site, being prepared to support the offshore wind industry. Have you all looked at the Hertford operation and the potential opportunities for that facility to support the offshore wind?
Yeah, absolutely. So we currently have a you know, a good portion of it that we support, but we're also looking at additional processing capabilities to be able to supply more of it, and also looking at potential expansion of our current operations too, from a grade capability standpoint. So yes, absolutely, we're looking at all of those things as a corporation. Doing the plate business in general is a very key strategic market and business for us, and Hertford with our sister division in Kentucky, and also we have a plate mill in Alabama too that will be we can utilize, but it will definitely affect us here significantly in North Carolina.
Thanks, Chad.
Yep.
We have a question, and I'm not sure that I understand it 100%. I'm going to ask it and see if any of you can answer. And then if not, I may take the opportunity to adjust the question a little bit. But how does the offshore supply chain differ in terms of qualifying suppliers than onshore? I don't know if any of you would like to take that one.
I probably can make a brief comment on that. I think we all are aware that offshore wind and onshore wind, even though it's the same family of power generation, it's a fundamentally different business, because the challenge to also from a process and safety point of view to do work in an offshore environment with the small windows you can actually even be there, it's a very, very demanding challenge. So it's a different business, but I would say the supply chain process and the criteria and the business process, I would say, is very similar to onshore wind. It's just the requirements will be different. And there I also think we should keep in mind that we have a very strong oil and gas learning curve in the US with a very strong background. So I think we should also consider, you know, there may be some partnership opportunities between a North Carolina business knowing the East Coast business environment well, teaming up with a oil and gas supplier in the Gulf and kind of bring those two capabilities together, or even teaming up with a global player who's already, heavily engaged in offshore wind. So I think this would be the synergies between service providers and suppliers. Does that sufficiently answer the question?
It does from my perspective. Anybody else want to chime in? All right, thanks, Andy. So we are at time, but I did want to mention from the North Carolina Department of Commerce also mentioned that given that they are the ones funding and leading the North Carolina offshore wind supply chain and ports study, please feel free to contact John Harden if you would like to provide input into those assessments. And you can reach out to any of us who have organized the webinar for John's email address if you don't have it or can't find it, but definitely a number of avenues by which to provide input and make sure that, if you know of sectors in the state that are potentially poised to supply the industry, that we make sure that all of that is included and well documented in our North Carolina strategy. Jamie or Susan, do either of you have closing words, or are we set to thank our panel and our audience?
Take it away, Katharine.
Well, then there it is. Thank you, panel. Thank you, audience. And we look forward to more North Carolina offshore wind webinars. For folks who have suggestions, please feel free to send those to us if there are related topics that you would like to hear about. And we are happy to bring together a room full of smart people to fill our brains with new knowledge. So thanks, everybody. We really appreciate it. And Susan, thanks for your partnership on this. And hope everybody has a great day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.